Hello, everyone, to the 52nd ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Locked on Colts co host Zach Hicks. Zach, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
Oh, it's actually kind of funny because when you reached out to me, you talked about how you covered James Madison sports,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Is that what you said?
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So it was almost about 10 years ago, and I was actually at JMU for my first semester of college, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with things, and I was like, you know what? I just want to work in sports somehow. I was doing sports
Mhm.
management at JMU, and um, it was funny. I had like a phone call with Matt Miller for a
All
project
right.
that I was
Mhm.
doing at JMU, and he said, if you really want to get into anything regarding sports or something like that, he does. He
Mhm.
just said, get to writing, man. Like just write, be unique, be different, and do your thing. So yeah, I tried my hand at it. I worked for something called like blog. I did like a blog spot
Yeah.
thing
Mhm.
on it back in the day, and it got me picked up by Pro Football Spot, which became a hotbed for so many talented people in the industry nowadays. I think Ben Solak was there
Mhm.
at Pro Football Spot. Jordan Reed, I believe, was there for a little bit. Now both of them are on ESPN.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's kind of just a launching off point there. But it really started from that conversation where it's like, you know what? I'm just going to try my hand at this. I'm going to try to write about football. And, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, but 10 years later, it's finally a career. But yeah, it was probably about when I was like 18, trying to figure out what the heck I was trying to do with life. I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? While I'm doing this college thing, I'll also just try writing and see what that can do for me.
Yeah, and that's a little fun connection there. I had Matt Miller on the podcast probably 2 months ago, so it's pretty cool that that's how your career sorta got jump started. And 1 week ago, getting into some Colts talk, the Colts signed quarterback Daniel Jones to a one-year, $14 million contract. Last season with the Giants, Jones started 10 games where he had a QBR of 47.8, which ranked 26th among all quarterbacks in the league. Do you think this is an appropriate contract for someone who's obviously heavily struggled throughout the first 6 years of his career?
Appropriate contract is probably up for debate at that point, just because
Yeah.
what is an appropriate
Mhm.
contract at this point? You're only worth what the market's willing to pay
Yeah.
you, and when it comes to quarterback, that people are worth paying quarterbacks, or all 4 point paying quarterbacks, whatever at this point. But yeah, Daniel Jones, he's a quarterback who's been to the playoffs before. He's a former top 10 pick, and at the end of the day, if you just have those two things on your resume, it doesn't matter what your recent
Mhm.
success looks like when it comes to NFL decision makers. They're going to take a chance on you. I'm not going to sit here and say I think Daniel Jones is some superstar quarterback. He's going to come in
Yeah.
here and fix anything.
Yeah.
Like you just mentioned, you talked about the QBR last year and where his struggles were, but
Mhm.
that's kind of the going rate for quarterbacks at this point, and he gets a chance to come in here and see what he can do and potentially be the Colts starter. I mean, at the very least, with the Colts injury history at quarterback the last couple of seasons, he'll probably get a couple games this next season.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we will probably see Daniel Jones at some point start some games for the Colts.
And it's sort of a low risk, high reward situation if Jones does well. And I know 14 million obviously isn't it's a solid amount of money, but for the quarterback market, it's really obviously not that big of a commitment, especially 1 year deal for the Colts. So I am looking forward to seeing how he does. However, over the past 2 seasons, I don't know if you saw this stat. Both Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson have the lowest passer rating in the NFL. What are you expecting that quarterback battle to look like between those two guys? Could Jones potentially start at the beginning of the year?
I think he could potentially start at the beginning of the year, but the way that I've been framing this quarterback competition is it's more of Anthony Richardson versus Anthony Richardson
Yeah.
than it
Mhm.
is Richardson versus Daniel Jones, in a sense where as long as Richardson comes into camp looking fine or
Mhm.
looking better than what he did to start this past season, like if he even looks how he did kind of towards the
Mhm.
end of last season, this is going to be his starting job. The Colts want him to win this job. They're going to give him every opportunity to win this job. And Daniel Jones is more so there where it's like, look, if you're not on top of your stuff this offseason, if
Mhm.
we're not seeing real improvement from you, then we have a guy who has started games before and he
Yeah.
will be our starter. So I'm not going to say it's like no chance that Jones starts week 1 for the Colts
Mhm.
because look, if Richardson struggles in the offseason or if he has another injury, Jones will be the starter. But I do think it is Anthony Richardson's job to lose, and it's
Mhm.
completely on him to come out of camp and come out of this offseason looking like a different quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of free agency, another major move that Indianapolis made was signing Super Bowl champion and Pro Bowl cornerback Charvarius Ward to a 3-year, $54 million contract. In 2023, Ward had 5 interceptions and led the league with 23 passes defended. Not necessarily as good of a year in 2024 productivity wise, but still obviously a really solid cornerback. What can we expect to see from him next season?
Yeah, I'm super excited about this signing. Charvarius Ward, fantastic player. I know last year wasn't like obviously up to his standards, but in his defense, he went through one of the worst things that a human being can go
Yeah.
through last year in terms of losing his 1-year-old child.
Mhm.
And he even mentioned in his Colts press conference that his mind and his body were in different places
Mhm, yeah.
last season. Very understandable. So
Mhm,
that's kind of the real aspect of playing the sport and playing this game that we all love to watch. So hopefully, a new environment and just another year removed from, again, just a horrible tragedy, he can get back to being who he was and be happy and comfortable in his playing life going forward. But Charvarius Ward, I mean, 2023, just a fantastic player, a guy who traveled with top receivers, was shut down in the red zone, made plays on the ball, and the Colts even mentioned that they're going to have him traveling with top receivers and
mhm,
playing more press man and getting on top receivers more often. So I'm expecting a big year from him. I think this was such a slam dunk signing for a team that has not had a number one corner since heck Vontae Davis back in like 2015, 2014, whatever it was. So getting a legit number one outside corner for the first time in over a decade for the Colts is such a massive upgrade. I
mhm.
think this is a
Yeah.
massive win for the Colts.
Yeah, and sticking with the secondary, along with Ward, the Colts also improved by adding safety Cameron Bynum on a 4-year, $60 million contract. Over the past 3 seasons, Bynum has had a combined 314 tackles, 7 interceptions, 25 passes defended, 3 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries. He's been doing a lot recently. What can we expect to see from Bynum alongside Nick Cross at the safety position? Bynum's obviously just, I believe, 26 years old, entering his 5th season in the NFL. So there is a lot of potential there in that secondary.
Yeah, with Ward, you're investing in, he was an all pro 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're really investing in with Ward. But when it comes to Bynum, you're kind of investing in the whole package with him in
Mhm.
terms there's still some growth opportunity for him. There's still something that he can turn into in the NFL. And on top of that, you're also getting a guy who is a leader in Minnesota, a beloved teammate in Minnesota, huge personality, and you're just injecting this type of player who's good on the field, off the field, and in the locker room to your organization. I think this is such a big signing just in terms of again, he brings the whole package that you're looking for. This Colts defense last year, there was a lot of I don't want to say like infighting, but there were a lot of comments made after games about guys not, trying their hardest and a lot of down comments and stuff like that with this defense being one of the worst in football. And I think getting a guy like Bynum in here does kind of turn around that culture on and off the field for your team. It gets guys having fun again, getting excited about coming to work, having a leader in the room who's been there, done that. A guy who's had to work his way up to being a really good player. He was a cornerback at Cal who was drafted on day 3, comes in there, works his way into a starting lineup at a completely different position with Minnesota, and becomes a really strong player for them the last couple years, working alongside Harrison Smith, one of the best safeties of the past,
Mhm.
20 years in the NFL. So I think this is such a great signing in terms of, like Charvarius Ward, you're getting the All Pro. You're hoping to
Yeah.
get the All
Yeah.
Pro. With Cam Bynum, you're just hoping to get a really good player and a really good person and a really good leader in this room, and you're investing in what he can become. So, like, they're very different signings, but they're both there for the same reason. Just make this team better, make this secondary much more palatable going forward, and turn around the culture in this locker room. And I think both those guys are going to have a big part of that.
Yeah, and going back to how young he is, I think there's a lot of potential with how productive he's been over the last 3 years. Maybe he even becomes better than Ward at some point. We'll have to wait and see. But, staying with the defense, the Colts have been recently rumored to potentially be a team looking at Trey Hendrickson, the Bengals defensive end. And, the Bengals obviously just the other night re-signed both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, gave them new extensions. Would you like to see the Colts potentially go after Hendrickson in a trade? And what would they maybe have to give up to pursue him?
It's funny. At the end of the day, we go through all these things as analysts to be like,
Yeah.
The trading for this, the market
Mhm.
value of this, the market, all those things. Like, would I give up these assets for this? But at the end of the day, it's about building up your team with good players. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's as simple
Yeah.
as looking at it and saying,
Mhm.
are the Colts better with Trey Hendrickson or without Trey Hendrickson? Obviously, they're better with a 20 sack guy coming in here. So yeah, I think it would cost a good chunk to go get him. A second or a third round pick. You'd be giving him 35 to 40 million dollars per year to keep him long term. And he's a 31-year-old pass rusher. It's not super sustainable to carry that
Yeah.
into your age 33, age 34 season. But when you have a GM who's been here for almost 10 years, when you have a coach going into a pivotal year three, sometimes you need that big swing. So I'm not sure how feasible it is at this point, just because, uh, you know, the Bengals seem to be trying to keep their star
Mhm. Yeah.
players, and they need somebody to play defense for them going forward. I mean, they're paying everybody on offense. They need somebody on defense. But if it were feasible and the Colts were to make that move, I'm not going to complain. Getting a guy like Trey Hendrickson in here can certainly help. He's one heck of a player.
Yeah, absolutely. And recently, the Vikings acquired Colts offensive lineman Will Fries on a 5-year, $88 million contract, as well as Ryan Kelly on a 2-year, $18 million contract, losing both of those guys to Minnesota. What are those losses going to mean for Indianapolis going forward? What's that going to look like with the offensive line in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, when it comes to losing Ryan Kelly, they have a center that they've been grooming for that
Mhm.
spot behind him, and
Yeah.
that's Tanner Bortolini.
Mhm.
Took him in the fourth round last year. Offensive line coach Tony Sperano Jr. absolutely loves Bortolini. That just 21 years old last year. He got in, started a couple games, looked like a really good young player, and I think the Colts are very happy with him being the next starter at center. And I think it was just kind of time for not to say to move on from Ryan Kelly, but just to get younger at
Mhm.
that center position and go to a guy like Bortolini. At right guard, it's a lot harder because Will Fries was having a fantastic season, only 27 years old. Ideally, you'd like to bring a guy like that back, but when his price tag got up to what it was and the Colts needed to make those investments at safety and corner, it just became tougher to do so. So, unfortunately, losing Will Fries is going to hurt, especially a lot more than losing Ryan Kelly, just because they don't have that clear succession plan behind Will
Mhm.
Fries. But they do have Mac and Salves, who they took in the third round last year, played a lot of right tackle for them last season. He does project pretty well as a right guard, and there's still some flexibility with what the Colts can do. They can go get a guard in the draft. They can get another veteran guard on the market. Like Brandon Sheriff is still out there. They could still get a 1 year stopgap with Sheriff, and then see what they want to do from there. So there are plenty of different avenues they can really see to attack this. But I'm not going to say it doesn't hurt. Going from Ryan Kelly, a former All Pro, former Pro Bowler, Will Fries, who looked like he was going to be a Pro Bowler last year before his injury. I mean, it's hard to replace those level of impact, but the Colts luckily have two young guys on the roster they like, who had good rookie seasons, and hopefully they can step up next season.
And as you mentioned, especially with Kelly, I think it's just about getting younger. He's 31 years old, making that transition sooner than later. And when it comes to free agency, a lot of the major players have already gotten new contracts. But are there any players that are still looming in free agency that you would like to see the Colts go after?
Yeah, I mean, they could certainly go after a guard, like I said, like a Brandon Sheriff type player, just getting a guy who can come in, be a solid guard for you, so you don't have to force guard in the draft. And then maybe Mac and Salves can still keep working at the right tackle position and potentially be your long term right tackle when Braden Smith leaves next season or after this upcoming season. They could certainly add a linebacker. I think Isaiah Simmons would be an interesting addition for them. Just buy low on the athleticism. He played under Jerome Henderson last year, who's the Colts defensive back coach. So I think getting him in here and then just getting something at tight end. They just don't have anything at tight end right now. I think their tight end depth chart is just Drew Ogletree and Will Mallory at this point. So I don't even know if your listeners know who those two players are, but those two guys are really their only guys right now at tight end. So maybe getting a Ty Conklin or getting whoever, just
Yeah.
insert any 1 year
Yeah.
contract at tight end at this point, just to get another body in there before you go into the draft. And that way you don't pigeonhole yourself into, we have to get Tyler Warren or else,
Yeah.
in the first
Yeah.
round. But yeah, there's some low end signings they can make, but I think, most teams are done with the big signings right now. All the big signings are kind of off the market, but they can certainly fill out the bottom of the roster still.
Now you just touched on the NFL draft. The Colts obviously have the 14th overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. You said that you kind of don't want them to go down that Tyler Warren route where they have to be stuck with him. Are there any positions or specific players that you would like to see them eye with that pick?
Yeah, well, actually, when I said Tyler Warren, it's not that I don't want them to take
Mhm.
Tyler Warren. I think he's a
Yeah,
really
I
good
just
player.
think
Yeah. It's
you don't want
just
them to be stuck where that's the only possibility.
right. I don't want them to
Mhm.
be sitting there at 14 and pick 9 is on the board, on the clock right now. And the Colts
Yeah.
are like, oh my gosh, we need to go up there and trade up for this tight end because
Yeah.
we don't have a tight end. I think that's bad business to ever be stuck in that. Be stuck in that where you have to take a certain player, have to take a certain position. And I don't want the Colts to be like that with tight end, especially in this class where I don't think there's too many top end tight ends. I think there's a lot of good tight ends, but no star tight ends. But yeah, Tyler Warren, if he's there at 14, or again, if they're all in on him and you want to go up and get him, be my guest. At this point, he does feel like the missing link on offense right now for this team. But on defense, Jahad Campbell, I think from Alabama would just be a match made in heaven for Lou Anarumo's system. You get a guy who can rush off the edge, who can play linebacker, who's only 20 years old. He can cover. I think this guy's the full package. And to me, he's a top 10 player in this draft. And I think he'd be a great fit on this Colts defense. So those are really the two guys I'm eyeing there in round one. If the Colts were to move back, I think Colston Loveland would be an interesting addition as well. Maybe not as good as Tyler Warren, but another good tight end that the Colts should keep an eye on.
And a name that you just said when you were giving that response, Lou Anarumo, who is the new defensive coordinator for the Colts. He came from the Bengals. What can we expect to see in 2025 now that Anarumo is at the helm?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a multiple, diverse, and aggressive Colts defense that we haven't really seen in a long time in Indy. A lot of Indy's history in the past 20 plus years has been that same cover two, like Tampa two, maybe a
Yeah.
little bit of the Seattle cover three type of
Mhm.
system where it's, we're going to win with four, we're going to sit back in our zone match type system, and we're going to let the offense make mistakes. Where coaches like Lou Anarumo, they come from that Mike Zimmer type of philosophy where we're going to dictate what you are doing on offense. We're going to muddy the picture for you so much post snap, where we're going to make this difficult for quarterbacks, and maybe that's not blitzing like 60 times a game like Wink Martindale or anything like that, but it is different in their aggressiveness in terms of we're going to show cover one
Mhm.
pre-snap and we're going to shift
Yeah.
quickly to cover three. We're going to shift quickly to cover two. We're going to shift to cover six. It's going to be a lot of different looks post and pre snap that make quarterbacks have to make these quicker decisions or just be muddied in what they're seeing. So, yeah, I think Anarumo is going to bring that diversity the Colts just haven't had. And, a lot of people look at last year with Anarumo in Cincinnati and they say, like, oh, last year they were pretty static on defense and they weren't very good on defense in Cincinnati. It's why they missed the playoffs. But, you have to have the dogs on defense to
Yeah.
be multiple and be diverse. And I think the Colts have really gone out of their way to give him the dogs, especially in the secondary, getting a Charvarius Ward, getting a Cameron Bynum, adding them with Kenny Moore and with Nick Cross and Jalen Jones, who's a good young player. That gives you the ability to be multiple and be diverse. Last year, Anarumo, until the second half of last year, really didn't feel like he could be diverse with the young guys he
Yeah.
had on defense. This year, he's going to have those guys in the secondary where he feels like he can do his thing. And I think we're going to see Anarumo at least get close to what he was in his peak years with the Bengals in that 2019, 2020,
Mhm.
2021, when he was really mixing things up and looking good there with Cincinnati.
And I mean, we mentioned this earlier, Trey Hendrickson. Is there potentially signs towards that connection with, teaming back up with his old defensive coordinator?
I mean, look, they're really close,
Mhm.
Hendrickson and Anarumo. I wish it could get done. I hope it gets done with
Yeah.
Indy, but we'll have to see. I do think it's probably more likely that he stays with the Bengals on like a 1 year deal. But we will see if the Colts can make that move there. I mean, again, at the end of the day, if you're getting a 20 sack guy, even if it costs you a top 100 pick and $1 jillion to get him here, I'm not going to complain. I mean, you're getting 20
Yeah.
sacks, and like I just mentioned, you can only be multiple and diverse on defense with the dogs on defense. They have the guys in the secondary right now. If you add Hendrickson with DeForest Buckner, you're looking at a pretty good unit on paper.
Now, the Colts aren't necessarily a championship contender, obviously. So if they go after Trey Hendrickson, they pay him a lot of money. Could you see that potentially backfiring where they're in a situation where they have a really big contract for someone who's aging, and this is the team that's not really having any regular season success?
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely
Mhm.
the worry with
Yeah.
those things. There is when you take a big shot in free agency or on the trade market, you
Mhm.
kind of need to be all in. And do they have the quarterback
Mhm.
situation to be all in? Probably not at this point.
Mhm.
Now, I do think it does open up your flexibility in terms of if Richardson is not your guy this year and
Mhm.
Daniel Jones probably won't be your guy either. It does open up the flexibility to say, hey, we have a winning roster that's just ready for a quarterback. So it opens up, say,
Yeah.
like we can move early picks for a quarterback that becomes available in the trade market. Or who knows, maybe they're just all in on Arch Manning or Cade Klubnik or whoever it is in
Mhm.
next year's draft. And they have all that ammunition with their draft picks to go up and get that quarterback that completes what they think is a Super Bowl winning roster. So it does kind of open up that flexibility there. But yeah, I mean, the moves always have a chance of backfiring. There's always a big
Yeah.
chance, and certainly when you're not in your Super Bowl window. So even if they do go out and get Hendrickson, this doesn't make them some Super Bowl favorite. They still got to get the quarterback position right. They still got to figure out the offensive line. They got to figure out tight end. The defense will be pretty good, but they still need to continue adding and trying to work this team to being where it needs to be.
Now, I'm a Commanders fan, and I feel like the processes that they're taking are sort of opposite. We get Jaden Daniels, and now we see in free agency, obviously acquiring Laramie Tunsil. You get Debo Samuel, and then I feel like the Colts have a chance to be a really solid playoff team. They're just looking for that franchise quarterback, obviously. And, I've heard that there's not necessarily, and I know that there's not necessarily a franchise quarterback guy in this draft. That's been a recent discussion. So, I mean, maybe they just build up the rest of their team. They eventually find that guy. And just like that, they are a contending team. We'll have to see there. Now, speaking of the quarterback position, recently the Colts added Chris Hewitt to be their new pass game coordinator. What changes can we expect to see now that Hewitt's here? How might that impact Richardson's development in any way?
So Chris Hewitt's actually the defensive pass game coordinator.
Defense, sorry,
So
my apologies.
no, you're good. It's really
Yeah.
confusing how teams how
Mhm,
teams
mhm,
put that there. But no, he's a defensive pass game coordinator. So he comes from
mhm,
Baltimore. Again, this was
mhm,
kind of
mhm,
the Colts' commitment to overhauling the defensive backs,
mhm.
where
Yeah.
they get Lou Anarumo in here, they get Chris Hewitt to
Mhm,
be the defensive backs game coordinator, or the passing game coordinator and
mhm,
coach defensive backs, and then Jerome Henderson, who comes from the Giants with Wink Martindale to be the defensive backs coach as well.
mhm,
So it's kind of just that overhaul of the secondary there. But yeah, Chris Hewitt's on defense there. On offense, they didn't make any changes to the coaching staff around Richardson. But Richardson, I believe, right now is training with Chris Hess down in Florida, who was the biokinetic trainer for Josh Allen. And Josh Allen's also working out with him down there in Florida. So Richardson's not sitting on his hands right now and sitting idle. Like he is
yeah.
working. It really just comes down to, again, how much of these things are clicking for him, how much of these things are becoming second nature for him, and is he cleaning up those mechanical issues and those, mindset issues, I guess, on the field to become the Colts'
Mhm.
future quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, the Colts are going to keep adding to the coaching staff. They're going to keep sending him to guys like Chris Hess and all these quarterback things. But at the end of the day, it comes down to Richardson, man.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure Hewitt is also the secondary coach.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So
So
yeah.
Hewitt's in
Mhm.
secondary, and then Jerome Henderson, I think, is like the safe or like defensive back.
Yeah.
It's weird how they
Yeah.
did it, I believe.
Yeah, but that'll definitely be interesting now that we see sort of a new secondary building in this team. Just what that will look like with Hewitt, obviously next season. And you hear about the guys like Jonathan Taylor, Zaire Franklin, those guys everyone talks about. what's an under the radar player you think could take a big jump this upcoming season?
Oh man, a lot of young guys. I mean,
Mhm,
on the offensive line, Tanner Bortolini, I think, really can be just a standout center.
mhm,
Just the things he was doing on film last season as an athlete, and then in pass protection, his eyes are so good. He's really good at just noticing stunts and twists and being a help blocker. So I think Bortolini on offense is really the guy to watch. On defense, I mean, Jalen Jones had a good year last year. As a
mhm,
guy
yeah,
who was forced to being the number one corner on the Colts, the number one outside corner on the Colts, as a former seventh round pick who almost ran the devastatingly low 4.6 at
mhm,
corner in the 40-yard dash, like the don't ever
mhm,
run a 4.6 unless you're Josh Norman, basically, at corner. And for a guy who had all that working against him, I think he was like third or fourth in the NFL in like disruption rate at corner in terms of just pass breakups and breaking up passes. He's not a perfect corner by any means,
mhm,
but he can finally step into a role where, and I mean this in the most loving way possible, like he's the weak link in the secondary
yeah,
now. Like
mhm,
he's not
yeah,
supposed to be the number one corner now. Now he's the weakest link, and he can be kind of that backside corner. He's not going to be the guy who has to follow a number one wide receiver. He can be the off zone coverage corner when the Colts are doing their mixed coverages. And I think he can thrive in that type of
mhm,
role. He can be what he was last year, but without having to cover Nico Collins 50 yards down the
yeah.
field. You can be in your off coverage and attack downhill in zone. So I think Jalen Jones, if he wins that second outside cornerback spot, can be a real bright spot for this Colts team. And I think they can finally limit some of his deficiencies and make him be like the good starting corner that he's made out to be.
Yeah, 100%. And, sticking with the secondary, safety Julian Blackman is probably going to be signed by a new team. I've looked at some rumors. You see the Eagles, Ravens, Commanders as a potential team. What's losing him going to mean to this defense next year?
Yeah, I mean, it does hurt to lose a player who's been here for so long. He's had so many good flashes too in
Yeah.
Indy. I mean, when he came out as a rookie, or his first like year or two with the Colts,
Mhm.
you just saw so many good plays, just attacking downhill, making plays on the ball. And even last year, where it wasn't his best season, he still came away with 4 interceptions last year, and that was with him playing through a torn labrum. So it does hurt to lose a guy that's just been in this locker room for so long and a guy that the players really trust and love to be around. But again, when the Colts defense is as bad as it was last season, they need to make some changes. And him coming off a season that wasn't great, along with having a lot of injury concerns in his past, it is kind of like an upgrade to go to a Cameron Bynum who has been healthy, who is a young player that's ascending, and you get to commit to him for 4 years. So it does stink losing a guy like Blackman, and I wish in a perfect world they could get him back here to be safety three, but you know unfortunately, there's
Yeah.
always time to move on, and the Colts are going to Cam Bynum now.
And I'm talking about the offense, specifically the wide receiver room. There's obviously guys Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs. All three of those guys had over 800 receiving yards last season, under 825. So they're all in that same little category, but they also play different roles.
Yeah.
Alec Pierce had almost double the amount of yards per reception that the other two guys had. Pittman had the most targets, Pierce had the most touchdowns, Downs had the most receptions. I mean, they all just do different things statistically. What do you expect that distribution to look like between those three guys, considering that statistically they are very similar players?
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, the breakdown would more so be, Pittman's getting your most targets
Mhm.
because he's your
Yeah.
number one. You're paying him to be your number one wide
Mhm. Yeah.
receiver. Ideally, you want him to be your 1,000-yard guy, your 5 to 10 touchdown guy, and be your alpha guy on the outside. But then Josh Downs is just going to be your catch guy. Your guy's going to get close to 100 catches. I don't know if he's going to get over 1,000 yards with those 100 catches because he's your underneath, your slot guy,
Mhm.
the Cole Beasleys, the Wes Welkers of the
Mhm. Yeah.
world. Like that's what his role is in the offense. And your guy who converts on third down. So ideally, if you're looking at how you're breaking this all down, it's Pittman getting like majority of the targets, majority of the yards.
Mhm.
Downs getting in there, getting a ton of catches on third downs, and maybe it's not like 1,000 yards, but it's like 7, 8, 900 yards. And then Pierce is your deep threat. Like I
Yeah.
look in a perfect world, your deep threat is going off for 1,500 yards and some superstar type player. But if he can just be a guy who keeps the defense honest and it can be like 30 catches for 600 yards, 30 catches for 700 yards. I mean, last year it was what, like 40 catches for like 820 yards.
I
Like,
think it was 37 for 824.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So Pierce was awesome last year, one of the best deep threats in football. And if he can just continue that type of production, the other two can jump up with being healthier and having more consistent quarterback play. I think that's the ideal breakdown in this Colts wide receiver room. But it's a fantastic wide
Mhm,
receiver room in terms of like each guy is so specific in their role. With
mhm,
Michael Pittman Jr., he's your intermediate, like your middle of the field guy, intermediate type guy, catches the ball over the middle. He's the guy you want to go to. Fourth down, game on the line, we're going to go to Michael Pittman Jr.
mhm,
Josh Downs is if you ever put a linebacker or a safety on this guy, we're going to throw it to him. He's the guy who can catch the underneath ball, create 10 yards for you. A guy on third downs, you're going to get him the ball. And then Pierce again is your deep threat. So they each have their specific roles. I wouldn't say either guy is like, and like any of these guys are like superstars,
mhm.
but it's kind of like a sum of their parts type of receiving room. And then you have the complete wild card in Adonai Mitchell. And if he can just put it together, man, he's only 21 years old and he was getting open so much last year. If he can really put it together and really develop as like a star caliber player over the next couple of years, then you're looking at a really darn good wide receiver room.
And I think a lot of it, obviously, Downs missed uh, 3 games last season, so he probably would have been number 1 in receiving yards if he didn't miss those games. And then you kinda mentioned how what would happen if it was a perfect world, but it was pretty similar actually to what did happen last season in terms of maybe you want them to be a little more productive, but Pittman did lead in targets, Downs led in receptions, and then Pierce did play in that, deep ball threat, 22 yards per reception. So they were kind of playing into those roles, obviously. And last season, the Colts had an 8-9 record, finishing second in the AFC South. What are realistic expectations for them going into this season?
Well, I think expectations, whether they're realistic or not, is just they got to get in the playoffs somehow
Yeah.
this next season. I mean, we're in year 10 of Chris Ballard at this point. We're in year 3 of Richardson, year 3 of Shane Steichen.
Mhm.
These guys got to get in the playoffs this year, or I'm not sure they're all going to be back. It's certainly maybe not like Ballard or Shane Steichen will be back if they don't make it this year. Certainly not Richardson if they don't make it with him
Yeah.
this year. So I'm not sure how realistic it is, but they need to find some way to get in the playoffs. It's not a tough division. Each team in the division has major flaws. It's not the hardest schedule this next season.
Mhm.
They got to find some way to get in the playoffs. I mean, realistically, I'm going to project them for somewhere between 7 to 9 type wins because I'm a pessimist by nature or anything like that, but I need to see more from the quarterback position before I can really project them to make the playoffs. But for the sake of Chris Ballard, the sake of Shane Steichen, the sake of Anthony Richardson, they got to find some way to get in the playoffs this next season.
Mhm. Now, I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things up. What's one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring sports broadcaster and journalist like me?
Oh man, I mean, I think Matt Miller said it best, man, when I talked to
Mhm.
him 10 years ago in terms of just get out there and do your thing.
Mhm.
If it's writing, if it's broadcasting, if it's whatever it is, be confident in what you do, take advice when you get it, and try to be as unique as possible. Try to be someone that people want to go to for something. Find your niche and just roll with it. So if your niche is like interviews like this or the highlight stuff you do or the specific way that you cover JMU sports or something like that, like make that your niche,
Mhm.
completely run with it and build up a loyal following. I think that's the biggest aspect here is, be yourself, but also keep running with, what you're good at and find your role in this crazy industry. It's going to take a lot of work, man. But
Yeah.
you're already doing all that work right now. So just keep grinding at it and go from there. But at the end of the day, man, just keep putting stuff out there, keep being confident in what you're doing, and people will resonate with that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that advice, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up? Where can they find some of your work if they want to check that out?
Yeah, you guys can find my work over at Locked On Colts. That's where I do all my audio and video type stuff there. All my writing is over at horseshoehuddle.com through Sports Illustrated. On Twitter at Zach Hicks 2. I think on Blue Sky I'm the same there. So if people are on Blue Sky, at Zach Hicks 2 on there. And Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I love talking to you're local to the DMV area, I'm assuming,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, me
about
too as well.
30 minutes away from Baltimore.
Okay, okay, yeah, I'm a little more
Yeah.
in Virginia here, so local DMV connection here, and look, we got to say, go Caps, go Commanders. You know,
Yep.
I cover the Colts, and I'm a Colts fan now at this point, unfortunately, but I'm very happy with what the Commanders are doing.
Now, did you grow up as a Commanders fan?
I did. I
Mhm.
did. But I was, if we're, just kind of going on story time here, I mean, I did Locked On Washington a couple years
Mhm.
ago,
Mm,
back in 2017. It was like my first like paying job in the
mhm.
industry.
Yeah.
And I remember when they traded for Alex Smith, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was like, not with the podcast, but I was like, I
Yeah.
can't root for
Be
this team
be a
anymore.
Redskins fan anymore.
Yeah, I was like, they're just committed to mediocrity, and I was, I was a fan since I was like 5 years old, 6 years old. So this is like back in 2002, 2003 is when I became a fan, and I was like, I'm done at this point. Now it's not like I picked a winner here. I mean, I kind of naturally gravitated to the Colts as it became more of my career, but I am happy for my family and happy for my friends who are Commanders fans, and happy for Jaden Daniels and the new ownership group, new general manager. It's really fun to see. I wish I could feel something for them right now, but
Was that rough watching them last season knowing that you switched over to another 8 and 9 mediocrity team?
it might have been rougher if I didn't have other Washington sports championships that I got to
Yeah.
experience. Like
Mhm.
2018 with the Capitals
Yeah.
was just one of my favorite sports moments of my life. It was so exciting. Then 2019 with the
Yeah.
Nationals,
Nationals.
I got to see it back to back. So maybe I would have been more bitter if if I didn't
Mhm.
get to see that. But I was happy for Washington. I hope they're able to win a Super Bowl. I mean, look, I'm not going to feel the same way I would have felt when I was like 15 watching the Commanders if they were to win the Super Bowl, but I'm still going to feel happy for them. I'm so happy to see the success, and I hope it continues, and I hope they can get over the hump.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Nationals. I'm a Orioles fan. Still
Oh,
waiting to see that second round playoff appearance, but
yep.
hopefully that comes this season. But with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Again, big thanks to Zach Hicks for being the 52nd ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.